Good morning. It's actually Sunday morning, quiet, and I'm going to go over percents the way the Singapore math program does it and then relate it back to technology and what the important takeaways are. So today I'm going to do mostly the computational type problems that they have in the book, and and I'll do another module on just the word problems because they're a little bit different. Okay. The facts you need to know are that if you are given a percent, and I'm talking more like 79%. So if you give it a percent like this, it's the same thing as taking that number and putting it over 100. So this part is always true. So if you have 500% here, you put 500 over 100. And that's the same thing as taking this number and moving the decimal place 2 places. So I'm going to show you examples where it's not exactly like this, but for the most part in the Singapore math book, the problems that you're given are just taking and moving it to the left, the decimal place, a couple places, 2 places. It's these, I think when we teach this in this way in the Singapore math book, you start to make algorithms in your head that don't always hold, and that's actually problematic. So I'm going to also show you with technology how we do this. But let's look at an example like this. If I have 46%, that's the same thing as 46 over 100, and that's the same thing as 0.46. And the skill you need to move on past this class is to be able to maneuver between one and the other form. If I have a different problem that's given in the Singapore math book is the 16 and 2/3. It's the same concept. It's the same thing as 16 and 2/3 over 100, and I'm going to show you where I get this 0.16666 from. So the first kind of questions you can get is how to express a percent as a fraction in simplest form. So I'm going to take that 46%. If I use the first part of this fact, that 46% is 46 over 100, the first step is to use that fact. The second step is to reduce the fraction. So I've always advocated reducing fractions by breaking things up. Breaking up, my algebra teacher used to say, is easy to do except if you're in love. 46 is really 2 times 23. So I'm going to replace the 46 with 2 times 23. On the bottom, I know that 100 is 2 times 50. Now, whenever I have 2 over 2, the same thing over something else, then I can remove that common factor. Because 2 over 2 is really 1, and 1 times any number is itself. So this slashing method, you will get used to it because you're going to have to get used to it when we start moving to algebra. So again, when we learn something, we should learn something so that it's sustainable to the next class and the next thing you need. So in the simplest form, the answer is 23 over 50. So just recapping, if I'm supposed to express a percent as a fraction in simplest form, what I first do is I take that percent that's given to me and I place it over 100. The next step is to reduce the fraction. If I reduce the fraction, the simplest way to do that, or the way that is most efficient, is to take out common factors. 46 is really 2 times 23. 100 is really 2 times 50. So they have a common factor of 2, and the 2 drops out, and we get 23 over 50. Let's look at this 16 over 23%. The first step, actually, you have some pre-work to do. 16 over 23 is really 50/3. Convert this to an improper fraction, not a mixed fraction. So this should be improper. There we go. Corrected. Okay, so that's 50 divided by 3. How did I get that? Well, 3 times 16 is 48, And then I need to add this 2, just to remind you where that came from. That's 50. So that's where the 50 came from in the numerator. The second step is to take this improper fraction and divide by 100. Just like before, remember that math fact? That I take the percent, this is really 50/3 percent, and I'm supposed to divide it by 100 to convert this to a fraction. So when I divide two fractions, units see a fraction, 100 is really 100 over 1. So when I divide 50/3 by 100 over 1, what I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to invert the second number and multiply those fractions. So this is what we call a multi-step problem, and it involves reaching back into 5th grade math and pulling some stuff to use it here. And now we're going to reduce. How do I reduce that? The same way as before. This is why this canceling method, which, you know, by the time I see students in college, they know the canceling method a little too well, actually. Sometimes they cancel things they're not supposed to cancel. But I look for common factors. So 50 is really 2 times 25. And 100 is really 2 times 50. Because I have a 2 and a 2 both here, 2 divided by 2 is really 1. And even though they're across from each other, really if I was supposed to multiply, I'd group everything together. And so I can kill that, the 2's, and I'm left with 25 over 3 times 50. I'm not done. I still have some factors. 25 goes into 25 once, and 25 goes into 50 2 times. So I divide 25 by 25, that leaves me 1. I divide 50 by 25, that leaves me 2. And now my fraction looks like 1/6. So 16 and 20/3 percent is really the fraction 1/6. So the hard part of this problem was actually the reducing. And you can reduce everything at once. The reason I reduce everything in pieces like this is arithmetic is not my strong point. You know, people sometimes think that that's what I do. I do arithmetic all day long. God would have to help us if I had to do arithmetic. In fact, I had to teach arithmetic at New Jersey City University once, and it was a bloodbath. And the reason for this is I actually use a calculator. So if I have 16 and 20, let me show you something here. So 46, if I wanted to know that as a percent, I would just divide it by 100. And I get 0.46. Now, if I wanted to know it as a fraction, let's pull up Wolfram Alpha. What's nice about Wolfram Alpha, and usually new scientific calculators, not even the, let's just look at 2/3. It immediately tells you that that's 0.66666. Or if I have 50/3, it tells you that's 16 and 0.6666. Now, if I wanted to get that, change that to a percent, I just multiply by 100. Oh, wait, sorry, 50/3, sorry, divided by 100. And it tells you immediately, Wolfram Alpha tells you that reduces to 1/6. And if I crank it, it also gives me, so this is the fraction. So if I take 50/3 and I divide it by 100, as we did in the previous problem, the calculator just automatically gives me that reduced fraction, which is 1/6. And so typically on on other calculators now, on the scientific ones, which cost maybe $15 at Staples at most, it would give you this 1/6. It'll reduce that for you. So reducing fractions has not been my strong point because I don't need it. So some people would argue, well, that's a bad thing if you're not able to do these things by hand. I'm still able to do them by hand. I just have to slow down and be careful. But I use my brain for other things with this technology. The other thing is I get 0.166666 here, which is the decimal representation of that fraction. So 16 2/3% is the same thing as 0.166666, and it's the same thing as 1/6. And all forms are given to you right here in Wolfram Alpha. So why am I showing you this? To change, if I want to take 46 and know the percentage, I'm supposed to take 46% and take that number 46 and divide by 100. Look what Wolfram Alpha gives me. It gives me all forms of this. It gives me the fractional reduced form, which is 2350. It gives me the decimal form, which is 0.46, which I showed you earlier in the math fact. And it also tells me it's 46%. All of it is given to me right here. And this is important to know because one day you're going to be doing these. The purpose of learning this is actually to use it. This is one of the most useful things. And in some sense, the exercises you're doing here are probably out of date. And you should probably be learning them with something like Wolfram Alpha. It's right at your fingertips. And you might say, well, why would I have to learn this? Because they're going to make me do this without a calculator, and I'm going to have to take certain parts of the SAT without the calculator. And the argument against that is, well, colleges like West Point, where I teach, you're allowed to use Mathematica on the exams. And so this is outdated. West Point's doing the right thing because this is a tool and you have to bring it in to your mathematics so that you can use it as a tool so that you can do sophisticated level problem solving. If you were presented with a real problem that you had to solve and you had every tool at your disposal, you are not going to spend your time by hand reducing 46 over 100. You're going to get on Wolfram Alpha, take that into Wolfram Alpha and do what you need to do there so you can solve the bigger problem at hand. These problems are never presented to you to solve by hand anywhere unless you're out, as I tell my cadets, you're out in the middle of a field somewhere and you had no choice and you had to do this percent by hand. All right, so that's my tip to show you how to do with calculators. All right, we're going to do this by calculator first so that you can see this. If I wanted to convert 8.8% to a fraction, let's see what it does. It gives it to me right here. It's 11 over 125. It gives me the decimal approximation as well. So we know the answer now. It's 11 over 125. How do we do this? By hand. Well, we use the boxes. 8.8% is really 8.8 divided by 100. Now that's weird looking because you have a decimal over 100. So how do I get rid of if you don't want to see the decimal and you can't use Wolfram Alpha, how do you get rid of that decimal? Well, you can get rid of it by multiplying by 10. Multiplying every time you move a decimal place. If you want to move it this way, you have to divide by powers of 10. If you want to move it this way, you multiply by powers of 10. So I'm going to take 8.8 and multiply it by 10. But whatever I do to top, I have to do to bottom because I'm multiplying by the number 1. So I don't want to change the fraction itself. So that's really 10 over 10, which is 88 over 1,000. So now I've got rid of my decimal and I've got a legitimate fraction up here. Now I have this horrible thing to reduce. 88 is really 2 times 44, and 1,000 is really 2 times 500. So I can drop those 2's out. Now I'm at 44 over 500. 44 is 2 times 22. 500 is 2 times 250. And those drop out. Slashing is fun. And then 22 is really 2 times 11, and 250 is really 2 times 125. And out they go. And I get the answer that Wolfram Alpha has got, which is 11 over 125. So a little bit of an advocacy for doing this slowly. These kind of problems I call bookkeeping problems. The whole point of them, once you know this math fact, I can test you by just asking you this math fact. Just give me the math fact. But if I want to see whether you can use it and really do it by hand, it becomes a bookkeeping problem. That's what I call these kind of problems. And to get bookkeeping problems right, you have to be slow and careful. And I am not slow and careful usually, but when it comes to my mathematics, I am slow and careful. And I still end up making mistakes. So let that be a point that you take really deep into your heart. If you want to get this problem right, go through it slowly and carefully so that you get the right answer at the end. Because that's the point of this problem. The little part here is not, to me, the point of this problem. All this arithmetic after is the point of this problem. So otherwise, I could have just asked you this question. How do you write 8.8% as something over 100? That's the fact. And that assesses that fact. It's not the fact they wanted to know, apparently. It's whether you can reduce fractions. All right. So that part here is how to convert percents to fractions. And I'm going to stop this module so you can pull it up separately.